It seems these days that celebrities are doing all they can to widen their sphere of influence. Now, in addition to being film or television actors, for example, they also now need to star in commercials, and they need to start creating and selling their own products. And if that's not enough, they need to start billing themselves as artists as well. This can be problematic because for some reason, our culture assigns a great amount of capital to celebrities. For example, I used to live in the lovely state of California, and I recall when we elected Arnold Schwarzenegger to be our governor. And I remember reading this letter that someone had sent into the newspaper saying that she had voted for Arnold Schwarzenegger because she liked his movies. So, it begs a question that as an art historian I am interested in. Are these celebrities making legitimate artwork, which I would define as being technically sophisticated, demonstrating a clear understanding of compositional principles, with fine craftsmanship, that is also making some sort of relevant statement about society and culture? Simply put, is their work contributing to the development of art and art history? Or are we simply legitimizing the artwork, allowing for their self-proclaimed label of artist simply because they are famous? And since a fairly major component of Art 201 is honing our skills and making value judgment from an educated standpoint, I thought I would pose this question to my students as well. And so what we have here then is an example of how to go about your research project for this semester, evaluating the work of celebrities that are fashioning themselves as artists. The celebrity I have chosen is Jane Seymour. The first part of your presentation, you need to address who your celebrity artist is, since this person may not be familiar to everyone, which is probably the case with Jane Seymour. Her apex of stardom was in the 90s with the television show Dr. Quinn Medicine Woman, which, to be honest with you, I did not ever see because, I'm sorry, I was too busy watching Beverly Hills 90210. So according to the internet, this show was a family-friendly Western that chronicled the adventures of Dr. Michaela Quinn, who was a doctor who had come to the frontier town of Colorado Springs to take over the practice of her father. Now, the town was not thrilled by her arrival because she was a doctor who was a woman. Now, this might be why she took a sort of Hatshepsut approach. Hatshepsut being the most bossest pharaoh of Egypt, who happened to be a woman, who masculinized herself. Dr. Michaela Quinn does the same thing by calling herself Dr. Mike. Now, of course, we do need to throw in love to the mix to make this truly a compelling television drama. She falls in love with the stereotypical sexy 90s guy with the long hair, this guy right here, who is rugged and emotionally unavailable, but she will be able to change him into this sort of sensitive grizzly bear. And for some reason, he randomly dresses as a Native American from time to time. But we can save the talk of cultural appropriation for another time. After her stint in television, Jane Seymour took a second career as a jewelry designer for Zales with her Open Hearts collection. I bring this up because I suspect that this will factor into her paintings, which is the focus of this presentation. The conceptual premise of this collection is, and I quote, "If your heart is open, love will find a way." Let me take a minute to wipe away this tear before we do a little formal analysis. We can look at these examples of her jewelry and we get the picture of the open heart. Two hearts in the same shape, intertwined, so that we've got this visual and conceptual unity. There's some open form mass, and we've got a subtle dynamic angle to suggest movement, which I interpret as with this movement as the ways in which love changes over time, and that ideally that love will grow. We see that she is connecting this concept with some easily recognizable religious imagery. Sorry, I cannot help myself but just throw in a little bit of iconographical analysis. And it looks like she's also connecting this concept to our love for our canine companions. If I had to take a guess based off just what I am seeing here, I have the sense that her work overall is sentimental. Let's see if I'm right. The requirements of this assignment ask that you provide 3 artworks by the celebrity that you've either chosen or been assigned, and to make 2 types of assessment: art historical legitimacy and artistic legitimacy. In terms of art historical legitimacy, we do this by connecting the work to previous styles. Keep in mind that this requirement includes first connecting the artwork to a foundational style, which is what I'm going to start with here. Now, I'm going to take this opportunity to test you a bit on your understanding of identifying foundational styles, because this tends to be a concept that can be challenging for students. So first, what are our 3 foundational styles? If you do not know the answer to this question, pause the video and go back in your notes and look this up. So hopefully you've either looked it up or you know it off the top of your head. Our 3 foundational styles are Realism, Romanticism, and Cubism. Look at the 2 works I provide here and try to guess which one is the foundational style. Again, take the time, pause the video, look at it, try to make an informed guess. So hopefully you did that. Obviously, Cubism is out since we are not seeing any geometric abstraction happening. Now, after this, it gets a little murkier. The brushwork, I suspect, is what's going to throw most of you off. The brushwork is loose, and that's a feature of Romanticism, but the subject matter is everyday people, everyday situations, which is Realism. So what could the answer be? The answer is Realism. Here's why. Yes, we have looser brushwork, but it is everyday people, everyday situations, which is not subject matter we see in Romanticism. The other thing that we need to keep in mind here with Seymour's work is that we do need to make a distinction between emotional and sentimental. Seymour's work is sentimental. It's sappy, it's saccharine. But I would say that the overt expression of emotion is very restrained. It's not like what we would see with Romanticism, with people crying and gesturing and being dramatic. The other thing is I am selecting Realism because it's going to help me work backwards. Think about using this strategy yourself when you're working on your presentation. If you look at her work clearly is impressionistic. And so we know that Impressionism grows directly out of Realism. So by establishing Realism as a foundational style, that's going to help me better argue for the impressionistic nature of Seymour's work. And I'm saying impressionistic because the problem with Seymour is that actually her work liberally borrows from both Impressionism and Post-Impressionism. In this case, it's really, really hard to kind of make a distinction one or the other. So let's take a look at what we've got going on. So here's another example, okay? And these subjects tend to me, in my mind, to be more in line with Post-Impressionism. And I can justify this by looking at both the visual mechanics of the style as well as the common subject matter. Let's start with the visuals. I would say that her work is post-impressionist because the brushwork is loose-ish. It's not quite as loose and sketchy as Impressionism, but it's definitely not as crisp and tight as Realism. Post-Impressionism also placed an emphasis on light and color to convey a sense of atmosphere, which we see here. Subject matter in Impressionism and Post-Impressionism is pretty similar. Both focus on leisure, which reflects everyday people in everyday situations. There was a well-known post-impressionist artist who was an American painter living in Paris, and her name was Mary Cassatt. She specialized in domestic scenes populated by women, and she even more so was known for her mother and child scenes, which are renowned for the quiet, intimate relationships that they capture. Her work is a great example of the post aspect of Post-Impressionism. We see some wonderfully sketchy strokes, like back in here, that reside right next to these more tightened up areas. This is impressionistic. This is post-impressionistic. This is just another example where we can see a similar comparison in all the ways I've outlined above. So what I've done here then in this comparison slides is I've located Seymour's work within the history of art. Now I want to return to Seymour's Forever Poppies to address the second requirement of this presentation, which is providing my assessment as an art historian of the legitimacy of Seymour's work. Should this work receive attention by scholars, or is this work simply receiving attention because she's a celebrity? Remember, you can include a personal opinion here, which I'm definitely going to do, but you do have to back it up with evidence, and some of this must be formal. Is the work produced by this person technically sophisticated? I will say, I think Jane Seymour's work is perfectly fine from a decorative standpoint, and I will never begrudge anyone for wanting to express personal feeling or experience through image. But, from an art historical standpoint, does this work make a contribution to our understanding of contemporary art production? Is she working with new techniques or materials or new approaches to imagery? Does the work reveal significant facets of our culture, of our society? Ask yourself these questions when you're assessing the work of your own artist. In the case of Jane Seymour, my answer would be no. First, from a technical standpoint, the painting translates as rather flat, which indicates that her understanding of atmospheric perspective is limited. Her attempts at an impasto stroke, an originally post-impressionist technique, are too gestural, and it makes for overly large-scaled poppies. They overwhelm the subject, and they certainly contribute to the overly flattened treatment of the landscape. Maybe that's intentional, this sort of overly simplified composition as a way to reflect the youth of the girl and this sort of bucolic nostalgia of landscape, or childhood, excuse me. But visually it's distracting, especially since it's an overwhelming application of a warm color. Now let's compare her work to Monet's since they're so similar. Monet uses a smattering of similarly sized strokes to convey a uniform size of the flowers. He limits their representation so that he can balance the composition with the figures. It also leaves room for other subjects to be included within the composition, which helps to create a sense of variety, of visual interest. It also gives some space to the composition, this perception of depth. It makes Monet's landscape actually seem like an outdoor environment. We can almost feel the breeze, where Seymour's feels very heavy and artificial. And conceptually, I am bothered by someone using a handheld watering device to water an entire field of poppies. Again, though, maybe it's this whole naivete of childhood situation going on. But this image does not feel modern to me, and that is certainly reinforced by the fact that the clothing is dated. What does this say about contemporary conceptions of childhood? I don't know, maybe that it's a commentary on somehow the ways in which we idealize childhood? Yet somehow I think not. I'm just not getting what she's trying to say here, besides from what I can glean from the title, and that is that there are a lot of poppies. I also find her painting very similar to Monet's. This preponderance of poppies spread out below a high horizon line, with hazy clouds lulling through the sky, with people engulfed in a quiet countryside. The work of Seymour is not particularly unique. Now, speaking of Monet, she does also straight out replicate his work. At least she somewhat cites the source of the image through the title's reference, the site where Monet painted his famous water lilies. So in conclusion, I'll return to the conclusion I presented at the beginning of this presentation. As an art historian, my primary complaint is that she is not contributing anything new to the history of art. She is simply recycling techniques, subject matter, and styles that are at this point over 100 years old. And from a formal standpoint, I find there are technical issues. Again, her use of atmospheric perspective is problematic, seen particularly in her color gradations. Her strokes are overly gestural at the expense of image clarity and intercompositional size relationships. Now here, I don't have any qualms about the formal qualities. I just don't like that it's a straight up copy. And you know what? Initially, I was trained as a postmodernist, so I don't mind some good old appropriation, but only if it's done according to postmodern strategies of critique, those that further the cultural dialogue, which I am sorry, I just don't get the sense that that is happening here.